Hi scholars, this unit that we are about to start is meant for my 4th and 5th grade scholars. However, if you are younger than 4th and 5th grade and you are just interested in learning more about the Middle Ages, knights, castles, and chivalry, you are more than welcome to follow along. And if you'd like to turn in any of the assignments to me, I'll make sure your teachers know that you're doing some extra work. Before we get started, you're going to need something to write with and some paper, because one of the first things that we'll do as we're starting each of our chapters is go over some new vocabulary to add to our glossary. So right now, you can go ahead and pause the video if you need to go get those things, and then we'll start writing down number 1. So I'm going to get my paper that I have here ready to go, and I'm going to make 2 columns for myself. I have one for the word and one for the definition. So right here, I have the word and the definition. And then I am also going to add another column for the part of speech. This is something that we've talked about a little bit. That means, is it an adjective, a describing word? Is it a noun, a person, place, or thing, or a verb, an action word? We're seeing what part of speech it is so that we know how to use the word in a sentence. So the first word that we are learning about is an adjective, a describing word, medieval, M-E-D-I-E-V-A-L, means of or relating to the Middle Ages. And if right now you are not quite sure what the Middle Ages means either, sometimes we have that issue with definitions. We don't know what the words in the definition mean. You will very shortly. We're going to get into that on page 3, so very quickly. The second word that we will be seeing in this text is transform, T-R-A-N-S-F-O-R-M, transform, which is a verb, an action word, and it means to change something completely, usually in a positive way. So transformers are cars that transform into robots. They change into something completely different, right? Transform. Word 3 is empire, E-M-P-I-R-E. An empire is a noun. It's a thing or a place, and it's a group of countries or regions controlled by one ruler or one government. All right, so we're reading about different empires as we go through this text. Our fourth word is S-E-I-Z-E, and that is a verb, an action word that just means to take. If I seize your toy from your desk, that means that I took your toy away, to seize. Word 6 is loot, L-O-O-T. That's a verb, an action word. That means to steal things by force, often after a war or destruction. I'm writing this down, after a war or destruction. And if you've already, the past tense of loot is looted. We add that ed suffix to say that it's already happened. Number 6 is infamous. 5th graders, we've talked about this with one of our characters, the infamous pirate in the book that we were reading, is an adjective that means they're well known, they're famous. for being bad. I was in Treasure Island, fifth graders, if you were reading that along with me. And we've got 2 more words. I'm running out of space on this page. You can see I filled it up with my words, their definition, and the part of speech. I've filled up my page. I'm just going to flip to the next page. If you need to pause, whoops. Remember, you can always just pause what you're doing and find your spot to unpause the video. The next word is an interesting word. It's papacy. P-A-P-A-C-Y, which is a noun. It's a thing. Papacy is the office or the position of the Pope. The Pope is the leader of the Catholic Church. So kind of like the presidency is the office of the president, the leader of the country. The papacy is the leader of the Catholic Church, the Pope. And then the last word we'll talk about today is nobleman. It's kind of a compound word, noble man. A nobleman is a noun, it's a person. And the definition is a member of the highest social class. And if you're talking about more than one, you would change the A and man to an E to make it noblemen, more than one, plural. All right, so we have our glossary all set for chapter 1, our introduction to the Middle Ages. The next thing that you're going to need to do, you can just add it to the next page if you've got space, is a little chart like this. So this section is called Welcome to the Middle Ages. The directions say, list important events that led to the Middle Ages. Identify the pages of the reader where you found information about each event. The reader is just the text that I will be reading from and will be up on the slide so that you can go back to it as well if you need to find evidence. So we've got our event on the left and then the page where we found it on the right. Something kind of like this, set up to go. There's nothing to add in yet, but when we get to it in our reading, we will pause to do that. So these are questions that we will find at the end, and you'll do these independently. I'll post them on the Google Classroom so that you can do them on a piece of paper and take a picture to send to me. Or if you would like to open a Google form, or not a Google form, excuse me, a Google Doc, you can type in your answers. Just make sure it says, remember to answer in complete sentences using information from the text to support your answers. So it gives you that place to write the page number where you found it, found your evidence. And our New Year's resolution is 2020. We're writing all of our sentences with capitalization and punctuation in the appropriate places. All right, I am going to pull up now our reader. I'm going to pause the video if you need to catch up. All right, so now we should be able to see the text. Here's our front cover. And here is our table of contents. The first chapter we're going to be reading is Welcome to the Middle Ages. So here is our big question. As we read, we're going to think about what are some of the events that led to the Middle Ages. So this is happening in the past. These are true events. This is a nonfiction text. The author's purpose is to give us information and teach us something new. Welcome to the Middle Ages. As I'm reading, I'm expecting you to follow along with me. If you lose your place because I'm going a little bit faster than you read, just pause and you can go back and find that place to pick up where you left off. Right here it says, if you know anything about knights, castles, or Robin Hood, then you already know something about the Middle Ages in Europe. The Middle Ages may seem to be an unusual name for a historical period, especially one that lasted more than 1,000 years. People in the Middle Ages did not know they were in the middle of anything. They thought they were modern, just as you and I do today. In fact, the Middle Ages was not a phrase used by the people who lived during that time period. It is a term modern historians use today to refer to that time period between ancient and modern times. So this happened in the past. Things happened before the Middle Ages as well, and that's why historians call it the middle of time, the Middle Ages. Here in this illustration, even though this is a nonfiction text, we'll see lots of illustrations because this was before there were cameras. So there are no photographs from the medieval times, the Middle Ages. And the caption shows us that these are medieval knights riding into battle. So we're going to talk some more about knights as we read. If you've never heard of Robin Hood, that's a character from a book, and they also adapted it into a Disney movie. If you have Disney Plus, you might could watch that to get some more ideas about the Middle Ages while you're at home. We begin our journey into medieval Europe, another name for the Middle Ages, by examining some key events that happened long before this age began. The first major event that helped transform Western Europe occurred when the mighty Roman Empire, having grown too big for one emperor to rule, broke apart into the eastern and western parts of the empire. This division had a major impact on Western Europe. When the Roman Empire split into two parts, different tribes took the opportunity to seize some of its land. Interestingly, some of these people were given the name barbarian from the Latin word barbarus, meaning foreigner or not Roman. The Romans may have considered these people to be uncivilized because they did not speak Latin, the language of the Roman Empire. So if you don't know very much about the Roman Empire, it was one of the first very large civilizations in Europe. Europe is a continent, and here we can see in this map, it's showing us that everything in purple is the Eastern Roman Empire. Everything in red is the Western Roman Empire. The capital is Rome, which is a city in Italy still today. And these arrows show us different tribes that were moving throughout these regions, trying to seize land and take control during this time. So we can see with this purple arrow, these were the Huns coming in from Asia in these eastern parts. This green arrow is showing the movement of the Visigoths, another tribe. These blue arrows show the Vandals. The red arrow shows the Franks, and then the yellow arrow here shows the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. So you probably don't know very much about any of these tribes right now, and that's okay. We're just getting familiar with these words so that as we see them, as we continue the text, we'll know a little bit more about it. But I do want to pause before we move on. We've got our events that were important during this time, and it says the first major event that helped transform Western Europe occurred when the mighty Roman Empire, having grown too big for one emperor to rule, broke apart into the eastern and western parts of the empire. So I'm going to write on page 3, the event that I saw that was important was that the Roman Empire grew too big and broke apart into the eastern and western parts of the empire. And this is important as we go on through history. So this is something that's good to know. The Roman Empire broke apart into the eastern and western parts. And it does not have to be a perfect sentence. If you just wrote, see, I don't have a full complete sentence. I've just got some notes to help me remember about that event. All right, you can pause if you need to catch up. We're just summarizing the idea, so it doesn't need to be perfect as long as it's something that you can remember later. Some of the most successful barbarian invaders were Germanic tribes such as the Franks, the Visigoths, and the Vandals. So there's the names again of those tribes that we saw moving through the western part of the Roman Empire. These tribes lived on the edges of the empire. As the Romans became unable to defend their borders, these tribes pushed farther to the west. The Vandals looted towns and villages so badly that today we use the word vandalism to describe the destruction of property. The most infamous so-called barbarians were the Huns from Central Asia. Attila the Hun led his nomadic tribe as they invaded parts of Europe in the 400s. As the Huns conquered, they drove the once dominant Germanic tribes even farther into the Western Roman Empire. So here's an illustration of Attila the Hun, leader of the Huns. All right, there was a lot of information there. So if you need to pause and go back and reread to yourself before we go on, that may help it stick in your mind a little bit more. I'm going to keep reading, but go ahead and pause the video if you need a second. As warlike tribes swept across Western Europe and powerful kings emerged, another transforming force appeared, the Christian church. Throughout these years of change, many people turned to the church because it offered them a sense of stability and hope. The heart or center of the church was in Rome, the seat of the papacy. That's still there today. Slowly, more and more groups of people became Christians, including Germanic tribes. Over time, the church became even richer and more powerful than many kings and queens. It is this time, when the Roman Empire was no longer the only powerful force in Europe, that many historians consider to be the start of the Middle Ages. Roman, Germanic, and Christian ideas, as well as powerful kings, began to shape Western Europe. In one of their Germanic regions, a great ruler emerged. His name was Charles, and he took control of much of the land that later became France. Charles ruled for more than 45 years. He increased the size of his empire by gaining land in areas that are now part of Germany, Austria, Italy, and Spain. As king, Charles defended the authority of the church. He promoted the spread of Christianity. On Christmas Day in 800 Common Era, he was crowned Roman emperor by the Pope in Rome. His reputation was so great that later writers called him Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great. And down here we see an illustration that looks like it was made around that time based on the way that it's illustrated. And it says Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne, which we know means Charles the Great, Roman emperor in 800 CE. So right now it is the year 2020 CE. We could do some quick math and subtract. So 2020 minus 800. You can work on that on your own. Let me know if you find the answer to how long ago that was. Charles encouraged new ideas and promoted an interest in education and art. To help him rule his empire, Charlemagne also encouraged a system of government that we now call feudalism. He gave land instead of money to those who worked for him in the military or government. The practice of paying men with land spread throughout other countries in Western Europe. Life in the Middle Ages was not the same as it is now. For one thing, people who lived back then probably thought about time differently. Many people measured time by the rising and setting of the sun and the passing of the seasons. For this reason, life likely had a slower, steadier pace. In addition, there was a strong desire to honor God that appeared to transcend time. As a result, people undertook impressive long-term projects such as building magnificent cathedrals that took centuries to complete. Remember, century is 100 years, so centuries means hundreds of years to complete. And over here to the left, there's a little illustration that says the Cologne Cathedral took 632 years to complete. That is a lot of time spent on one building. Language and location helped shape people's lives too. Because travel was so difficult, many people didn't do it. Generally, only rich, educated people in Europe traveled. Almost everyone else stayed close to home. Although Latin was the language of both the church and government, only select members of society could understand that language. Most people lived an isolated existence, kind of like we're isolated right now if you're quarantining. They did not travel far from home. As a result, most people communicated using the language or dialect spoken in their place of their birth. As strange as it may seem to us, in certain parts of Europe, villagers from places just 30 miles apart could not easily understand each other. For this reason, most people during the Middle Ages were concerned with the affairs of their village, what they owed the local lord in the way of payment, and how to ensure their place in heaven. So, this is saying that there were so many little groups of people that only communicated with each other, that there were many different languages. And if you traveled very far, you might not be able to communicate with words with those people because you would speak different languages. There are a lot fewer languages in the world today because of colonialism than there were in the past. So right now, we might have like 2 or 3 languages that people speak in our neighborhood. Back then, it would have been a lot more than that. All right, and this shows us a diagram of the loyalty to the king and the protection that you had from the king. It says, although this diagram does not include every aspect of medieval feudal society, it does show the people with the most power at the top, the king, and the people with the least power at the bottom. So those people are called the freemen and serfs. S-E-R-F is a serf. It's a name for a person, not like a surfboard. That's S-U-R-F. Then here in the middle, there's the middle class, including the merchants, the people who trade things, and the craftsmen, the people who build things. And then closer to the king with a little bit more power are the nobles, including the lords and the church leaders. So people like the Pope and the priests had more power than these people here at the bottom. There was another force that had a huge impact on Western European society during the Middle Ages. This force came in the form of a deadly disease. The disease, called the Black Death or Plague, certainly made its mark upon medieval Europe. This dreadful plague first appeared in the 500s. In the second half of the 1300s, it swept through Europe once again. Spread by the infected fleas that lived on rodents, the Black Death probably killed 1/3 of the population of Western Europe. Despite conflicts and hardship, this period in history was also a time when people created impressive and inspiring architecture. Great castles and churches began to adorn the landscape. Kings, queens, and noblemen held jousts, and court jesters entertained noble families. In Knights, Castles, and Chivalry, you will discover what it is like to work on the land for the local lord. You will learn about what life was like in the incredibly crowded towns of the Middle Ages. You will wander through a castle and find out how young men trained to be knights. Are you ready to explore this fascinating time in history? All right, so I'm going to add to my events here a couple of things. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to add that Charlemagne, Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, you can write either one, was crowned Roman Emperor. This was on page 5, we found that. And then I'm also going to add that the plague, here's another event, the plague or Black Death. We'll learn more about this in later chapters. Killed 1/3, 1 out of every 3 people of the population of Western Europe. We're finding this on page 8. So that later, if we need to come back to this, we've taken some notes. We're self-managing so that we have these little jots that we can go back to instead of having to dig through the whole text, because there's a lot of words in this text. All right, and then there's one other little challenge in this chapter before we move on to chapter 2 in the next video. This says medieval musings. Musing, to muse on something is to think about something. It says, in the Middle Ages, people used a pleasant smelling plant, sometimes used in cooking, to clean their teeth. What is the name of that plant? And it says a clue is the first letter is R. I don't know. So a plant that starts with a letter R was used to clean teeth and to cook. Roses is a plant? I don't know. Think about it. See if you can come up with it. Number 2 says an instrument that helps us to see faraway objects, such as stars, was invented in the Middle Ages. What is the name of this instrument? So I see right here there's an illustration. It says a picture of night sky from medieval manuscript. It kind of looks like they're looking through a tool that scientists use even today to look up at the stars. So this instrument means a tool, not just a musical instrument. A musical instrument is a tool used to play music. But what was this instrument to help see faraway objects? And then the last question says, during the early part of the Middle Ages, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes invaded an island nation and remained as settlers. The Angles gave their name to this land or kingdom. What is this kingdom called? If you can find that out by looking at a map and researching some more, make sure to let me know, and I will give you a shout out in our next video for finding those answers. All right, so we're going to pause for now. Scholars, if you're doing about 2 or 3 of these a week, that is wonderful. You're keeping up with your learning and becoming more knowledgeable about the medieval times. I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, and I'll see you for chapter 2.